Oh, welcome to another fabulous flip lesson for Mr. Moore's math class, and Mr. Rockenstein's as well are welcomed in. Today we're going to be talking about comparing and ordering fractions. So we're talking about looking at which one's bigger and smaller, and then also how to put them in order, what to look at. And the first thing you think about is, well, why do we need to do this? What's the point of this? What's it worth? Well, the first one is because we said you had to do it. So there. So you have to do this. Learn how. The real reason that you want to be able to do this is real life decisions. And an example would be like if you were at a friend's birthday party and pizza's being served, and your friend's mother offers you 1/4 of a pizza, 2/18 of a pizza, 3/6 of a pizza, or 3/8 of a pizza. Which one would you choose, and then why? So you need to be able to know, well, I want a really big piece, so I got to figure out which of these is the biggest, or maybe you don't want a lot, so you need, oh, I want the smallest piece. And so you have to be able to answer these questions. And there's a ton of things even beyond food out there where you might have to figure this out. So we have a few different ways that few different tricks that we use to compare. And there's three main ones we're going to talk about right now tonight, and I'll mention the fourth. One is we look at the numerator. And we can take a look at the numerator and whether or not it's the same or different. That's one of the first things we're going to do. And we'll talk through some examples on that. If it's the same, then we can move on and we'll look at the denominator because that's going to tell us which one might be bigger. If the numerators are different, then we have to look at the denominator as well. So that second step would be, well, or the second option would be looking at the denominator to decide which fraction might be bigger. Our third one we're going to talk about is comparing each of the fractions to a half. Is it bigger than a half? Is it smaller than a half? If one is smaller than a half and one is bigger than a half, right there you can tell which way you should be going. And the last way that we're not going to talk about tonight, but that we will talk about in the next day or two is to make common denominators with the fractions, and then you can compare them directly. So an example on this first one, we have 1/3 and we have 1/4. And we want to find out, okay, well, which one's bigger? Well, the denominators are the same on the top. So there's one piece of each of them. So then we have to look at, well, okay, let's look at what 1/3 is versus what 1/4 is. So we can take a circle here and compare these two. So if we divided this circle into thirds, we would have three pieces that look like this that would go around. If we divided it into fourths, we would have four pieces like this yellow piece that would go around. And so we're comparing directly either fourths or thirds here, and we have one of each. Well, which one would be bigger? I mean, if we just put them side by side, you can see 1/3 is bigger than 1/4. And that's one of the things you can look at when we look at denominators. Usually, if the denominator is smaller, that means you've divided something into less pieces. If our denominator was 2, that would mean we've only divided it into two pieces. Well, 1/2 or one of those two pieces is a lot bigger than 1/3. So that can help you. Just like if you have 1/8 versus 1/3, 8 pieces are going to be a lot smaller than those three. So in this case, when we look at the numerator and they're the same, we bump down to that denominator and we can decide, okay, it's into 3 pieces. Well, 1/3 is going to be a lot bigger than 1/4. So that was our first way of comparing. Our next example now, we have 6/9 and we have 6/10. So again, it's 6 pieces, so it's the exact same. So we looked at our numerator, they are the exact same. One of them's not bigger than the other. So we need to look down at the denominator, and we have 6/9 and 6/10. Well, if I look at that, a tenth and a ninth really aren't that much farther apart. But we're going to do the same thing we just talked about. And we're going to say, okay, if you divided something into 9 pieces and you divided that same thing into 10 pieces, which pieces would be bigger? Well, the 9 pieces would be because there's one less piece that you had to cut it into. So if we have 6 out of those 9, that's going to end up being bigger than our 6 out of 10 pieces in this case. So we would choose 6/9 as the bigger, and I'll use, this is Nate's favorite one. He loves the flowers. So we'd use 6/9 here. So now moving on, if we go to our next problem, and I kind of gave some funky colors here, but our denominator or our numerators now are different. And we know 7 is bigger than 5. but we need to check our denominators here. And so the denominator this time, they're both the exact same. So it's out of 8 pieces. So we have 7/8 and we have 5/8. And so whatever we divided up, we divided it into 8 pieces, both of them. So would you rather have 7 of those pieces or 5 of those pieces? Which one's bigger? Well, 7's bigger. So we know 7/8 is bigger than 5/8 in this case, just by looking at the numerator and the denominator. Another example, now we're getting in some different numbers, and we have 10/24 and 9/17. Well, I look at the numerator and they're different numbers. So I'm going to go to the denominator. Well, that's different numbers too. So what are we going to do now? Well, we're going to try and look at how they relate to 1/2. And is one less than 1/2 or is one greater than 1/2? So if I had a circle out here again, if I just divided that into 1/2, just so we can make sure we're looking at that the right way, 10/24, I need to look at, well, what's half of 24? Because that would be 1/2 in this case. That would be equivalent to 1/2. Well, half of 24 is 12. So I know my 10/24 is going to be less than half, because half of it would be 12/24. So I know this one is less than half. On the other side, I have 9/17. Well, I can look at what's half of 17. Well, it's going to give me a different number. So I'll bump it down one and go 16. Well, what's half of 16? Well, half of 16 would be like 8. So we're saying, okay, if we're going to do half of this, it's going to be somewhere around 8. Well, 9 is bigger than 8. So I know this is a little bit bigger than half. So in this case, just by looking at how they relate to 1/2, I can say 10/24 is less than 9/17. And I'll give you another example. Now we have 9/10 and we have 13/14. So again, this one is Nate's favorite. He loves the flowers, so he always asks me to do that. But we have 9/10 and we have 13/14. Well, I look at the numerator and they're different. I look at the denominator, the bottom number, and those are different also. So now can I compare them to 1/2? Well, half of 10 would be 5. Well, this is way bigger than 5. Well, half of 14 would be 7. Well, this is way bigger than 7. But I also know, like we talked about, if we divided something into 10 pieces and we divided something the same size into 14 pieces, the 10 pieces are going to be bigger because we cut that into less pieces. So in this case, I can just talk about, and I know, well, 9/10 is going to be bigger than 13/14. Actually, I just said that wrong. I said it the opposite way. 9/10 is going to be smaller than 13/14. Even though there's 14 pieces and they're tinier, we have more of them. So 13 out of 14 is going to end up being bigger than 9 out of 10. And I'll show you a quick example. Okay, so if we look at what 9/10 is, we have the same size pieces here on the left and on the right. On the left, it's divided into 10 spots. So if I filled 9 of those, we'd fill up to here. On the right, we have 14 it's divided into. So I've filled up 13 of those. As we go up, you can see 13/14 is a little bit bigger than 9/10, even though these pieces are bigger. Because the numerators are different, we end up having this one be larger. And that's how we can compare. That's another strategy to compare. So the last thing I'm going to have you do is try and put these 4 fractions in order from least to greatest. We have 1/2, we have 3/10, we have 13/15, and we have 7/16. And remember the strategies that we talked about using. You can look at the numerator, and then decide if they're bigger or smaller when the denominator is the same. You can look at the denominator, and that's going to tell you, are those bigger pieces or smaller pieces based on what the numerator is. And then, of course, you can compare the fractions to 1/2. Hope you enjoy this, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.